Some viewers may find the following video disturbing. Viewer discretion is advised.
Welcome everyone. Today we're going to be talking about The Bully of Skidmore, Part 5. This is the story of Ken Rex McElroy. Now when we last left off, we had talked about how McElroy and Alice had moved in with his mother, and shortly after that he began talking to and seeing Trina McLeod. Now also keep in mind that at the time that he began seeing Trina, he was around 36 to 38 years old, where Trina McLeod was 12 years old. And how he had known Trina was he used to go hunting with her stepfather, Ronnie. And at the beginning of the relationship, Ronnie and Trina's mother did not believe that anything was going on and that the relationship was not as bad as it was. And it wasn't until the school had not only contacted Ronnie, but not only the school, but even the school had contacted Trina's uncle Russ, who was also a sheriff deputy. And even after contacting them, even Trina's very own peers that she went to school with, even her friends at school, would even approach Ronnie and tell them about the relationship. At which point, Ronnie would confront Ken McElroy and tell him that he did not agree to this relationship and that by all means he was to leave her alone. At which point, Ken McElroy would not only shoot the family dog, but burn the house down. And after this point, Ronnie would begrudgingly allow Ken McElroy to see his 12-year-old daughter. They would continue seeing each other over the next period of 2 years, and when Trina McLeod was 14, she would drop out of 8th grade because Ken McElroy would actually get her pregnant. Now, 1 year prior to Ken McElroy moving in Trina McLeod to the farm that he lived at, Alice would actually get tired of the abuse and would actually leave Ken McElroy, and she would take with her their 3-year-old son, and she would go live with her parents in St. Joseph's. Now Ken McElroy would actually find out about this, and he would follow them all the way to her parents' house in St. Joseph's. Ken McElroy would approach the house and threaten Alice to come outside, or he was going to take the son home with him. To which Alice would tell him that she had a gun and would not be afraid to use force. At which point Ken McElroy would take a gun out of his pocket and actually shoot her stepfather Othea in the leg. At which point Alice and Othea would begin a charge against Ken McElroy with intent to do bodily harm, maim, or kill. While they were waiting for the trial, Ken McElroy would begin stalking Alice and Othea, more so Othea than Alice, and he would actually take his pickup truck and actually park in front of their house with the lights on. He would honk the horn at different times of the night and would even take his gun off the gun rack and show it to Othea and Alice if they ever peeked out through their windows. It is also said that on many occasions, almost on a daily basis, Ken McElroy would actually call the house and threaten Alice and Othea with their lives, more so Othea than Alice. On one particular night, Othea would actually go into a tavern to have a few drinks, and Ken McElroy would actually follow him into the tavern with a knife in hand and would approach Othea and tell him, "If you do not drop the charges or swear to me to drop the charges, I will kill you." To which Othea would tell him he was not dropping the charges, so Ken McElroy would actually walk out of the tavern. At which point he would shortly return back to the tavern with a 12-gauge shotgun in hand. At this point he would lock the tavern up and he would approach Othea, and he would point the gun at his face and then point it down at the ground. And he would tell Othea, "If you do not swear to me that you'll drop the charges, I will kill you. I will start at your feet and work my way up till there's nothing left." And he gave a warning shot in between Othea's feet. already terrifying the already frightened customers at the tavern. It's not really said what had happened at this point, but eventually the cops were called, and by the time the cops had arrived at the tavern, Ken McElroy was already gone. But the bartender and the witnesses in the bar would actually testify that Ken McElroy had approached in a gun and had threatened Othea with his lives, at which point the cops would then arrest Ken McElroy, now not only with the intent to bodily harm, maim, or kill, but also add on to the fact that they were going to put a charge of to deter a witness from testifying in court. And they would put it under as a felony charge. But they would let him be released on a $1,500 bond. Ken McElroy would then hire Richard McFadden. And Richard McFadden would, in his life, would be the person that he would go to whenever he got in trouble. McElroy would also boast that McFadden was also a mob lawyer. And on March 2nd, 1972, when the trial began, McFadden would argue that he didn't really deter a witness from testifying in court, and that the gun going off in the tavern was purely accidental. And surprisingly, during this statement from McFadden, they would actually drop the charge to a felony charge to a misdemeanor, at which point the prosecution would begin bringing in all the witnesses from the bar of the night. And to their surprise, all the witnesses would either change their story, not remember what happened, or just refuse to testify in general. The bartender, who was actually feet away from Othea and McElroy, would even go and say he doesn't remember seeing anything. So the prosecution would try to bring a material witness, Alice, into the stand to testify, because she was there during the stalking, she was there during the phone calls, and she was actually present when McElroy would actually shoot Othea in the leg. But unbeknownst to them, around this time, Alice had moved back in with Ken McElroy, and she completely changed her story as well, and would only refer to Ken McElroy as a fine person and an outstanding citizen. But even though everyone had changed their story or refused to testify, and because Alice had changed her story completely, the judge would still find Ken McElroy guilty of a misdemeanor and sentence him to 6 months. But McFadden would actually reappeal the case, and while this was going on, Ken McElroy could actually walk free until the appeal would actually happen. And 1 year later, after the events of the original trial, by the time they went to the appeal, the court records had already sealed that particular case, and all charges were ultimately dropped on Ken McElroy, and he would actually walk free. On one interview, Henry McLean would interview Othea, and Othea would make the statement, with Ken McElroy, you were always the bad guy. If you were somebody that he shot, it was your fault for doing something to make you get shot in the first place. And if he was in a relationship with you and he beat you, it was your fault for triggering him to beat you in the first place. He was always never taking responsibility or accountability for his own actions. Everyone was at fault for his pain. On June 11th, 1973, Trina McLeod, after giving birth to her second child with Ken McElroy, not even 2 weeks after the event, she would actually approach Alice and ask her to take her to her aunts and uncles, at which point she would tell her that she was planning on leaving Ken McElroy and wanted her to help her in leaving him. So Alice would actually take Trina and McLeod and take their children and go over to Trina's aunts and uncles. This is also the uncle that was a deputy sheriff. And there they would go and plead with her aunt and uncle about what was going on at home with Ken McElroy, to which her uncle would tell her to stay in the house and not leave for anything. But it would not be that long till Ken McElroy found out that they had left and where they were.